So Dr. Lad, can you just introduce yourself and where you practice and your areas of specialty?
Sure. Name's Nandan Lad. I'm a functional neurosurgeon at Duke, director of innovations program, and interested in a lot of different things from digital health to patient outcomes to translational research.
You said you're the director of innovation. Can you speak a little bit more about that role too?
Sure. I think there are many types of innovation. We've worked on different medical device projects over the years in terms of traditional device innovation and moving things from bench to bedside. I did MD PhD prior to coming to Duke, and that's part of that translational research mission. Then I did my neurosurgery residency and fellowship at Stanford, and part of it is figuring out what you enjoy the most. And for me, it's really on that clinical translation piece of bringing things to patients and scaling an impact.
Nice, and it's actually, maybe that's a good topic to think about. So that translational piece, but also think about like AI and digital. In medical, it kind of feels like it's been a little bit stagnant to kind of break into medical. How do you see that roadmap progressing? Like, what do you see as kind of the first indications for AI, and how will that progress moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's the very early days. It's similar to how the internet was 25 years ago, and I think we're in like year one of that phase now. So I think it's up to us as a field, as a community, as patients, providers, industry, to work together to figure out what are the use cases, where does it add value. Certainly there's big tech involved in helping address things from a patient perspective, from a provider burnout perspective, from an efficiency perspective. And I think ultimately it'll come down to collaborations and then unique data sets and domain expertise.
Actually, it's interesting because in my mind, I was thinking about the patient first for AI, right? And how can you have better patient experiences? How can you better experience with the OR? I was talking to a CEO of a big healthcare system, and she was actually mentioning, given where our healthcare systems are, to your point about operational efficiency, she saw the best routes for success of AI in year one was actually helping like the back end staff and trying to, again, prevent the burnout and stuff that you were seeing. In your mind, kind of how do you see them playing together? Is there one you see as kind of like the quicker win, or do you see them both as like parallel paths that we need to progress upon?
Yeah, I think different teams are working on different areas. I think you have to pick a use case where you think you can add the most value. At Duke, as part of our innovations program, we have an initiative called Surgery GPT, modeled after
so cool.
ChatGPT. And within that, we've looked at a variety of different use cases. One is how do you explain things to patients at a simple fifth grade reading level around complex surgeries. From a provider standpoint, there's a bunch of use cases, but one is how do you streamline the process of operative notes and make that more efficient. From a billing and coding use case, how do you do that in a compliant and more efficient way? The medical coding staff is understaffed, and that's what brings in revenue to the hospital. And from a clinical trial standpoint, how do you better match patients to studies that are of interest to them than what's available now?
And when you look at that, what are some of the biggest barriers, and how are you and your team trying to break down some of those barriers?
Yeah, I think it's working with the experts in each of those areas. So whether it's patients that have feedback, surgeons that are doing those procedures and have domain expertise in different areas, they're the experts. I think, and then also leveraging unique data sets. There's a variety of different large language models now, OpenAI having the market-leading one currently, and I think leveraging things that maybe we can contribute and add value to. So we have a decade plus of operative notes, for example, that are unique to our health system. Every health system has that. But how do you leverage those hundreds of thousands, a million plus operative notes as a unique training data?
Yeah.
And that can help address some of these unique use cases, and then working with the domain experts in those areas to say, is this really helpful? Does this add value to your workflow or not? As opposed to sometimes technology is created looking for a need, and then please use this. That's historically how software in healthcare has worked. And so we're trying to make sure the end user is involved from the very beginning.
And kind of maybe building on that, in your mind, from the patient perspective, what are the biggest needs, or kind of how would you add the most value, do you think, to the patient?
Yes, I think I've been involved in different projects. I helped start a company focused on digital health and surgical navigation. And part of that learning process has been, from a surgeon's perspective, I've done thousands and thousands of surgeries. From a patient's perspective, it's their hopefully first time and only time. And it's scary, right? So how do you help decrease anxiety? How do you make them educated consumers of healthcare, knowing what to expect, when to expect it? So some of that can be done using traditional digital health mechanisms, workflows, but I think AI has a place in that too, in terms of having a more conversational approach, having them sort of address the questions that they're most interested in a curated and easy to understand way.
And in your mind too, with some of that, so kind of from the patient perspective, I think about where Dr. Asheron yesterday said about everyone gets back surgery, but not as soon as you mention the simulator, everyone's kind of, oh, I don't think I want that. For AI though, right, because AI now has infiltrated our lives with ChatGPT, and I was at a hockey game a couple weeks ago, and the person in front of me was using ChatGPT to look up stuff about the hockey game. How do you think patients will react when this AI comes into their lives? Do you think they'll be excited? What barriers have you seen, or have you predicted seeing, or kind of how do you think, they'll react to this?
And I think it's, most of the people I speak to are very familiar with ChatGPT and other large language models, but majority of the US or the world is not.
Yeah.
And so I think when you take a macro view, maybe our bubbles that we live in, it's widely penetrated, but I think the user adoption is still in its infancy, and so part of that is understanding what are the unmet needs from each of these stakeholder perspectives. Sports and hockey games are certainly one use case, but healthcare and surgery are another, and so I think the type of user interface may be different. I think multi-modal AI is here. It's only been sort of a year of this generative AI wave. But the ability not just to do text, but to do audio, to do images, to do video, it's here now. It's at the beginning of the beginning. But what you do that in terms of operative video, or pre and post-op X-rays, or how someone dictates an operative note. So I think there's a variety of different ways you can incorporate multimodal AI into what is being developed now.
And out of those different types of AI, and maybe even think about digital and data, what are you most excited about? What are you most passionate about kind of making sure solves those patient needs and maybe solves kind of the inequality or maybe different education levels of the patients?
Yeah, I think, patient access is one big hurdle, and some of that is related to just understanding what the therapies are that are available, and then two, decreasing the barriers to accessing those therapies. So I think those have been long-standing issues in healthcare, and I think AI can help democratize some of that knowledge. I think healthcare is still a lot of trust in your physician and surgeon, and if you're a surgeon, that's fine, right? But there's a limited amount of time in the day, especially in a busy clinic, and so a lot of it is, this is the procedure, we have a great team, and we'll take great care of you. That's sort of the condensed version of a 15-minute conversation, and that's what the patient remembers. But I think a lot of us are fortunate to know people in healthcare, and we can say, who's the best person for that? And I want to go to them, or I want my mom or dad to go to them.
Yeah.
And not everyone has that luxury. And so I think figuring out how do they have the best experience, but also knowledge to make an informed decision regardless of where they are in the world, and hopefully have the best possible outcome.
Yeah, and maybe switching gears a little bit here too, how do you think you as a surgeon will have to adapt to some of these changing AI digital trends? I've heard things about will surgeons need MBAs to understand more the finance model and how AI could be applied to the operational efficiency? Will they need data science degrees so that they can understand is the data trustworthy? I guess, what do you see as your role and how it's going to progress in all of this?
As a surgeon, I did my MD, PhD. I said, I'm not sure if I'll go back to get an MBA, but I'm getting my real world MBA, if you will, just from doing things. But kidding aside, I think responsible AI is sort of a big initiative. Duke is one of the thought leaders in that space, and working with great team members there. And I think it's up to us to contribute if we want to sort of see the change that we want to see, as the expression goes. And that's what we're doing. So making sure we have the clinician input from the beginning, and for each of the different use cases, who are the experts in those areas, I think is going to be important. Otherwise, technology will evolve, it will develop, and then we'll be sort of stuck with whatever that is. So I think it's important for all of us to play an active role.
And it sounds like you guys are also doing a really nice job at pulling in, like you said, all the different stakeholders, right? Because it's not just the clinician, it's not just the patient, it's the experts in AI, it's the experts in regulatory, it's the experts probably in like the reimbursement at some point too. So it sounds like you guys are pulling everyone together to help make some of those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the differentiators are going to be, domain expertise and data. Compute power is there, but aside from that, I think those are going to be the differentiators, and each of these are niche cases. So our world of neuromodulation, for example, here at the NANS meeting is one area, but an AI for neuromodulation may be very different than sort of the use cases as well as data sets we use for transplant surgery, for example, or breast cancer surgery. So I think it's a matter of thinking about what are the unique data sets that are applicable to each area of healthcare, and then how do we address the key challenges those areas face.
Yeah. And maybe one final question, and then we'll open it up. As you think about the future of neuromodulation, how do you think it's going to change and adapt over the next kind of 5, 10, 15 years? Like in your ideal world, let's say the technology's brought in, the patient's brought in, the inequality or ineffectiveness has all kind of changed. What does that vision look like 15 years from now?
Yeah, and I think, in neuromodulation, the generation of closed loop stimulation is here, both on the spinal cord stim side and DBS side. So that is a form of AI. Integrating objective and subjective data, I think, is also going to be very prevalent over the coming years. So what is a biomarker of pain or a biomarker of tremor? And then some of these are subjective experiences as well, just like most conditions. So how does pain impact your quality of life? How does tremor impact your quality of life? Just as an example, there's different facets of each of those. But integrating all of that data into predictive models that are much more personalized for that particular patient, I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that over the coming years.
And maybe a follow-up to that, it seems like sometimes different companies will say, oh, this is my data, right? Or, in my mind, sometimes it's like, well, it's the patient's data, right? So how do we bring all that data together, or what types of partnerships or what type of platforms need to be here to make sure all that data comes together rather than having disparate data sources that don't all link up?
Absolutely. I think, number one, we're all patients at some point in our lives, right?
Yeah.
So the line is a little bit gray or dotted. But I think, patients own their own data. Informed consent or e-consent is now fairly easy to do, and that's something we've implemented in different solutions. And, democratizing that data. So certainly there's the doctor-patient relationship, which is critical, but industry has a big part to play in that too. Especially for implanted devices. And I've seen a shift in mindset where, a lot of medtech companies are thinking, it's our patient too.
Yeah.
And, part of that is collecting the data. It's not, set it and forget it, move on to the next patient. It's this patient has an implanted device with our brand on it. And so we are going to make sure that patient does well and capture that data along the way, have a better patient experience that translates to a better patient outcome. More engaged patients do better. That's been shown across the board in pretty much every healthcare field. And a lot of that is data points. And so I think the more we start to think of that way, of how do we capture the data left in the field, how do we curate that data in a structured way, and then leverage that to do the predictive analytics to say, these are the things that are coming down the pike based on hundreds of thousands of patients like you. I think that one will add value, and two, will give a much better, more personalized patient experience.
Yeah, and I think that point about, the patient is, the medical devices in the industry need to be more involved in a sense, and I think even about the different trends in consumer healthcare, and Fitbit is a $1.6 billion company, right? But then also you have CVS coming in who's trying to own everything from a primary care perspective, telehealth, prescription, and Amazon now kind of getting into that market. I think hopefully will push some of these bigger players to also say, look at, there is a consumer shift of the patients wanting to be more in control, but also it's like a duty, like you said, almost like that you should be helping the patient, and you have this opportunity to help them.
Yeah, and I think some of that comes through strategic partnerships. So I think addressing what your core competency is making world-class medical devices. That's great. And then who are the best partners that have digital health, who have AI experience, understand the complex clinical workflows. I think that's been successful in different areas of neuromodulation, and I think more of that will be happening because there's only so much time in the day.
Yeah.
And that's the common thing that we all have in common. And then it's like, who do we want to work with? How do we deliver value to patients, to providers, to the industry, to payers, all part of the ecosystem.